So let's talk about the books I read in October. Now, this is a funny month for me because I went back and I actually watched my October TBR and saw the books upon it. I did preface that video by saying I am a huge mood reader, so what I actually read most of this month was not on my TBR. But let's go through the ones I did read. Actually, before we do that, let's mention the ones I didn't read. I did not get to Soul of the Deep. The ebook and the audiobook, and I'm putting it off because I felt the first book ended so nicely that it wasn't really necessary for there to be a sequel. So I'm kind of scared that it's going to drag down how I felt about the first book. I also didn't get to read Voyage of the Basilisk or Entwined with You. Now, that's because I am buddy reading both of those series with friends over on Discord, and neither of them were ready to read the third book yet, so we've postponed it. Both of those and we're going to do them in November. And now the rest of these, I have started some of them, but I have not finished. So, our Destroying My TBR book club pick for October was Finders Keepers by Sabine Durand. As of filming this, I am about 40% into it. I'm not really feeling it, but I don't want to DNF it. But I might have to, because we are reading Game of Thrones in November, and that is a hella chunky book, and yeah. So I think this one's DNF. Not my first one. Not my first monthly pick that has been a DNF. I DNF'd Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern and Lovely War by Julie Berry, which were both book club picks as well. Now, the rest of these, two I have started. One I've read previously, it would have been a reread for me, and then the other two I just didn't get to. So, Gone, I didn't get to read. I read other things. I did read this in childhood, but I wanted to read it as an adult. Just never got to it. The Blade itself was a reread, so I wasn't that bothered about not getting to reread it in October. I will reread it before the end of the year, as I am going to be reading the entirety of the First Law universe next year, and we're prioritising what I haven't finished next year. So, Caliban's War by James S. A. Corey. I loved The Expanse, and I read the Butcher of Anderson Station and really liked it. Started this one, I think got about 40-50 pages in, and then just stopped. I wasn't in a sci-fi mood because I read the original trilogy of Dune. Just different kind of sci-fi. Now this is the one I'm most angry about. I'm over 300 pages into it from my last reading before I put it down. I did attempt to continue on from there, but if you've read it, you know there's a lot of back and forth, there's a lot of characters to keep track of, there's a lot of history, a lot of interpersonal relationships, and I had forgotten so much. It was like I needed to start over, and I was like, I wasted 300 pages basically. I have to start over, and then I felt so angry and upset with myself that I didn't finish it when I was reading it before, that I just didn't attempt to go back to the beginning. This is one, I am going to read it, but like I've been finding for Stephen King in particular that reading his books in chronological order, because Stephen King's universe is a bit like the Cosmere. There are self-contained stories, but there are characters and things that overlap and reappear. And you don't notice these little connections unless you read them in chronological order. So last year I read Carrie, and The Shining. I'm rereading The Shining next month, December, January, purely because I want to compare it side by side to the movie, basically. And I read Salem's Lot, which are in chronological order. It comes a lot further down that list. So I think I'm just going to work through King's backlog of books. And when I get to its actual position in publication order, then that's when I'll sit down and read the entire thing. But this is not going away. This will haunt me until I get there. And then my terrifying classic, which was Dracula. Dracula has many adaptations, many retellings that I've read. I've read retellings of Dracula. I've watched different movie and TV adaptations of Dracula. Like, just to illustrate how much. Hellsing is one of my favourite animes. Alucard is Count Dracula. It's even said in the manga, when it's discussing Alucard's history, that his name when he was human was Vlad Tepes. Vlad Tepes is Dracula. So I don't know what's stopping me from reading the original thing. I don't know whether it's because I think I'm gonna read it and not like it, and then it's gonna spoil all Dracula retellings and adaptations for me. Just this weird little block I've got going on Dracula. So that was everything that I did not get to this month. And in just a second, I will run through what I did read in October. Okay, so on to the books I did read in October. We kicked off with a graphic novel, Human Remains by Peter Milligan. Now, this was weird. Think of it as a cross between Bird Box and A Quiet Place. It's weird. But basically, it's about the struggles of a couple living in this world where an alien creature has arrived on Earth, and basically if you express any strong emotion, it appears and kills you. And it's the tensions this couple have, mainly because the female partner has quite a high sex drive, likes to vocalise and show her enjoyment of sex, and obviously with this creature and the threat of it looming over their heads, it causes issues between her and her partner. A fairly decent read, very gory. I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. And then next on the list we have Flight 171 by Amy Christine Parker. Now, if you liked Final Destination, especially the first film, you need to read this book. It is like I don't know how to describe it. It's like a crossover between Final Destination and The Exorcist. And features a massive game, not of truth or dare, but, what secrets is everyone keeping, basically. Hell of a ride, really fast pace, is set literally over 4 hours. And that ending was good. And I hope that Amy Christine Parker writes more horror, because it's definitely her genre. That was an easy 5-star read for me. Then after that I read Pretty Dead Queens by Alexa Donne. Now I've dipped in and out of Alexa Dunn's YouTube channel. You know, I'm not a writer, but I am fascinated with the writing and publishing industry. So learning things that go on behind the scenes, like how contracts work, how advances work, was really interesting to me when she spoke about them. But I've never read any of her books. Pretty Dead Queens is the first for me. Now this is typical YA mystery thriller. Very run-of-the-mill, very basic. You know, some interesting reveals, some good love interest. Just didn't end up with the love interest I wanted, which I'm sad about. Gabriel was a really nice guy, and, you know, he was fun. Yeah, but just pretty average, so that one got 3.5 stars. Then we can go on to a new series I started. I know one said I wouldn't be starting too many new series this year, but I read Ace of Shades by Amanda Foody. Now, I read Daughter of the Burning City by Amanda Foody. God, it must have been 2-3 years ago now. Absolutely loved it. Was so disappointed there wasn't a sequel or follow-up or anything to that. So I finally picked up Ace of Shades, and I ended up really enjoying it. Yes, there's a lot of exposition, character development, world building, magic systems, because it's the first book in the trilogy. But even with all that and the little ups and downs in character behaviour that were there, I ended up really enjoying it, and that was a 4.5 stars for me. Now, we had a series that I both started and completed this month, which is the infamous Frankie Lord series. So the first book is Stealing Greenwich, the second book was Going Wild, and the last one was No Admissions. So I had to read them because I actually got on a blog tour for the last book, No Admissions, without realising it was the final book. However, I was lucky that these are middle grade heist novels. So they read really quickly. I read all 3 in a single day, which amounted to something like 700-800 pages in a single day. So Frankie is the daughter of one of the most infamous thieves in history, who has recently been cornered and caught by the FBI and is in prison. So she gets sent, because she is a child, to live with her uncle, who is a police officer. So you can just imagine the shenanigans she gets up to, being a child that was raised to be a master thief, now living with a police officer, having to go to school and make friends. It's wholesome, it's adorable, it's funny, and they're just so easy to read. Stealing Greenwich was a solid 5 stars, as was Going Wild, and then No Admissions was, I have to check, I think it was a 5-star, but I'm not quite sure, because there was one thing I had issues with. No, yeah, it was a 4.5. Yeah, the end of the series didn't quite hold up to the rest of the series, but it was still great. Brilliant. Now, around this time of the month, I started trying to read books from my NetGalley and Edelweiss. So the first book I read was Textrovert by Lindsay Summers. Now, I was really nervous when I picked this up because it is a Wattpad book. Most experience I have with Wattpad books is not good. The only one I have read and enjoyed was First by Laurie Elizabeth Flynn, something like that. I can never remember. Really great though. Textrovert, it was average. It was run of the road. It was basic contemporary romance. 2.75 stars. Nothing really much to say on that. That was very quickly followed up by Not Working by Lisa Owens, which I DNF'd at 30%. I just couldn't do it. It didn't see any point to the novel. It wasn't funny. It wasn't making any social commentary. It was just boring. Sorry, but it was boring. But I followed that up with one of my favourites of the month, and that was The Steep and Thorny Way by Cat Winters. Now, I read Odd and True by Cat Winters, and it was okay. I think I'd give it like a 3.5, 3.75. Steep and Thorny Way blew my mind. It is a retelling of Hamlet, but it does things you don't expect. And it has a lot of social and racial commentary in there. And there was a lot of research and history that went into the novel. And I really enjoyed it. It was a solid 5-star. And then this one took me by surprise. So the next one I read was Frostblood by Ellie Blake. Now, the older I've gotten, the less I like YA. Especially when it comes to fantasy. I have gotten into Sanderson and Jordan and Martin, where we have epic casts, generations and centuries of backstory and world building, and YA obviously just lacks that depth. But Frostblood really took me by surprise. I love the magic system. I love the political things happening. I liked how it goes from enemies to friends, friends to lovers romance. And it's not insta-lovey like, another 5-star read. So, the next one was The Stars in Their Eyes by Katie Gardner. This was the last blog I needed to do for October. And I don't know what to say about this one. This was post-apocalyptic survival-ish story. But it's marketed as being LGBT, queer, female romance. It is not. While the main character is bisexual, at least, there is no romance. The partner, Tess, isn't in the story until like the last 10 pages. You do not see her. But she does have a very interesting relationship with Jacob. And honestly, I felt reading it that the queer romance was put in there purely for the sake of putting it in there. It served no purpose in the story. It didn't really make sense. The ending was weird because of it. You know what I mean? And I just didn't get it. If anyone has read it, the scene in the barn with her dad should have been the ending of the book. In my opinion, it shouldn't have gone past that. Because it was just weird and confusing and bad. And I hated it. I ended up giving it 3 stars overall because there were elements. The contact with aliens, the survival, the post-apocalyptic elements I really liked. It was just the characters and their relationships that I despised, especially the main character. The main character, Keely, she's just awful. And she's not meant to be unlikable. You're meant to root for this woman. And she's unlikable and rude and hurtful for the sake of being hurtful. And it just made for a poor reading experience. So I shall not be continuing with that. Next after then was a short story. This is Savage Indulgence by Shayla Raquel. Now, I got this from Book Sirens. And I was like, oh, it's a 50-something page short story. It'll be cool. Not going to be anything great. Might be okay. No, this was amazing. Like, if you ever ask yourself, what would Hannibal Lecter be like if he was a 60-year-old woman? This story answers all those questions. Absolutely astounding. I just casually read the first couple of sentences and boom, I had read the entire thing in like a couple of hours. It was amazing. I will definitely be checking out more of Sheila Raquel's short stories and anything else she's written in horror. Next, though, was admittedly it was a dicey choice. This is Under Her Skin, which is a poetry collection, specifically a woman in horror poetry collection. I hated this. I don't know where it is with poetry, especially when it centers around a theme, but it's so boring and repetitive. You know, there's one or two poems that you think, oh, this is interesting, this has a nice message, and then all the other poems have the same message. I had the same problem with Amanda Lovelace. I read 3 of her connections. I think it's the first 3 that she came out with. First one, pretty good. I enjoyed it. I think I'd give it 5 stars. Second one, I was like, okay, this is doing similar things to the first one, but there are some new elements. So I got 3.5. And then the third one just rehashed what the other 2 did with different words. So that got 1 star. And any other poetry collection I've tried to read, I've had a very similar experience with. So I just genuinely think poetry isn't for me as a reader. Which is sad, because in the past I have written poetry. I like poetry when it's done right and when it's done well. Which 9 out of 10 times it's not, unfortunately. Most modern poetry I've read is just trash. Sorry, not sorry. Next we also had another one. Oh, I give the poetry collection 2.5 stars in the end. Didn't mention it. The next one was An Evening of Romantic Lovemaking by Ben Slotky. Now, like with Not Working, I did not see the point to this novel. Nothing was happening. There was one major character that was just, the entire book was just him spewing whatever was in his head. It didn't make sense. It was disjointed. There was an element of, is this real? Is this not real? You know, are the people he's supposedly keeping hostage actually there? Is he just talking to himself like a fucking nut job? Yeah. I got about, it was like 20% in, and I was like, I cannot do this myself right now. And that was it. Sorry, the end. But then after that, another novella, The Prince and the Witch by L.A. Thompson. Now this, initially when I read the synopsis, I thought, oh, this is a gender-bent retelling of Cinderella. And yes, it is at the beginning. But something happens around the halfway mark that changes the entire direction it goes in for the better. It was amazing. And this is the kind of short story that when people say if it was expanded on a bit more and had a bit more depth, it would be an absolutely amazing novel. And it is. I gave the short story 4 stars. It lost a star purely because there were relationships and character development. The magic system needed more depth to take it from great to amazing. But for what it is, at like 120-ish pages long, it is amazing. And I will definitely be checking out more of L.A. Thompson in the future. I think that's everything. I will just double check that. Yeah, that is everything I read in October. I did start 2 others. Twilight, obviously I've spoken about, not Twilight, Eclipse, a few times. I am currently halfway through it, as of filming this at nearly 2 a.m. on November the 1st. But I was completely sidetracked by Madly Deeply, the Alan Rickman Diaries, because I managed to get my hands on that, and I've been reading that, and annotating and tabbing it. Which obviously means it takes me longer to read it, because I don't normally annotate and tab books, so I have to devote more brain power to it. So yeah. So in my November TBR, you will see me mention both Eclipse and Madly Deeply, because they are going to be the first couple I finish in November, along with one for a blog talk.